A quick warning before we get into this episode, some of the language is a bit graphic. Hello and welcome to On Deadline. I'm Amanda St. Hilaire.
I'm Kendra Nichols.
And I'm Dennis Owens. Thanks for joining us.
If you're listening for the first time, we are journalists for ABC 27 News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
But on this podcast, we talk about issues that affect people all over.
These are the conversations you don't hear on the news. We're different generations with different experiences, so we don't always agree.
But we do get very personal, get very real, and hopefully get you thinking.
We are recording on Monday, October 2nd, 2017. And today we're talking about gender and school sports. Should boys be able to play on girls' sports teams? How are school districts navigating issues of gender fairness and gender discrimination? We'll also talk about recent NFL protests during the national anthem, when sports, politics, freedom of speech, and questions about patriotism collide. And finally, we'll hear a word from you, the comments and questions you sent in this week. But first, we want to introduce ABC 27 sports reporter Ross Lippman, who's joining us for this week's episode. Welcome, Ross.
Hello.
Are you excited about your podcast debut?
Oh, yeah, it'll be good.
He couldn't sleep last night.
We obviously have conversations leading up to, when we schedule something with each other, and I think we all agreed that this will be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, so we're having you on for this conversation. All of these conversations, actually, but we're going to start with gender and school sports.
Sure.
Because you recently did a story about a 12-year-old boy named Colin who lives in Palmyra School District, loves field hockey. This kid loves field hockey and wants to play, but his only option to play on a school team is to play with the girls, and the school said no because it could be dangerous. So how did you get started on this story? What piqued your interest?
Well, how did it get started? I actually was forwarded an email from the ABC 27 investigators about the Kirkpatrick parents. Dave and Kathy had reached out, expressing interest in sharing their story about Colin and Colin's twin sister, Olivia, who both have, real interest in field hockey. Both are in Palmyra Middle School now. And the school district had decided that Colin was not going to be allowed to play on the middle school field hockey team, which is, of course, a girls' team. There are no boys' field hockey teams in our area. As far as I know, there are no boys' field hockey teams through any schools in the state of Pennsylvania. So it was several months of playing phone tag and talking to the Kirkpatrick parents about what's going on, what's the relationship like so far between the parents and the school district, what had the school district through its superintendent, Lisa Brown, said to them about why they weren't allowing Colin to play. And once the school year got underway, we felt it was appropriate to go meet the Kirkpatrick family, talk to them about how strong are Colin's interests, and then get into not just the back and forth of how people might perceive the issue of a boy playing on a girls' team, but actually get into the policies that are in place to basically decide whether or not a boy can play on a girls' team and vice versa through the school district and the PIAA, and that's what the story focused on.
And of course, we're going to put a link to your story in our show notes, but for people who maybe haven't caught it yet, what did you discover as you went through those rules and those policies?
So the heart of it is really that there's a relationship in place between the PIAA, which is the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, the primary governing body for athletics within schools in Pennsylvania, and the school districts themselves when it comes to deciding whether or not boys can play on girls' teams and girls can play on boys' teams. The PIAA has a handbook which lists a bunch of rules and bylaws that determine all types of policies when it pertains to sports in schools. As it relates to mixed gender participation in sports, for boys wanting to play on girls' teams, there are 4 primary pieces of criteria that are used to determine whether or not a boy can play on a girls' team. It's not up to the PIAA to decide, though. They list the bylaws, and they say each school is able to interpret these bylaws as they see fit, how it relates to their school and their situation with this particular boy. So when you talk about the Kirkpatrick family and Colin, the 4 criteria examine whether or not the boy would be a physical threat playing against girls, whether or not the boy would create a significant competitive advantage playing against girls, how many sports are available to boys within that school district as is, and whether or not the boy would take away a roster spot from a girl by joining this team. So every school district looks at those 4 pieces of criteria, examines the boy's ability, the boy's size, his physicality, and makes a determination. In this situation, Palmyra determined that the boy, Colin, could not play on the girls' team because he would be jeopardizing one or more of those pieces of criteria.
Did they elaborate on exactly what?
Well, so this is kind of where things got tricky for us from a reporting standpoint. We reached out to the Palmyra School District on multiple occasions directly to the superintendent, Lisa Brown. She never got back to us, so we never were able to receive their version of why the decision was made. From what the Kirkpatrick parents told us, though, in conversations leading up to this story airing and what we reported on, they were told that Colin would be a physical threat. Now, this is a little interesting based on Colin's situation because Colin is a small kid. He's short, he's thin, he's yet to hit puberty. He's really, honestly, smaller than a lot of the girls that he would be playing alongside. His sister is about 5 inches taller than he is, and they're twins. But again, bear in mind, that might not be the case in every situation.
In a couple years, if he's on a high school team.
Exactly. So, I had all kinds of anecdotal conversations with people who had an interest in this story. One person in particular said to me, well, what about volleyball? Girls volleyball is slightly more popular within schools in Pennsylvania than boys volleyball. What if there was a boy, a 6'4" middle blocker who wanted to play volleyball, but there was no boys team and he wanted to play on a girls team? If there weren't some sort of filters in place, that team would immediately become the best girls volleyball team in the state.
Well, and with field hockey, Palmyra is very good at field hockey.
They're one of the best.
So I'd imagine that plays into this too when we talk about fair or unfair competitive advantage.
Yeah, their field hockey team competed for the state championship last year. They've been in the state championship game or have won the state championship multiple times over the past 10 years. And, you don't want to directly compare the middle school program to the varsity program, but the players that end up being on the varsity team, it's like the minor leagues.
Yeah, and we also should point out that in Pennsylvania and in this region, boys playing field hockey is kind of a foreign concept.
I
But
didn't
the fact
even know
is,
that boys played field hockey.
in the Olympics, it is a
no
male
clue.
sport. There
And
is a male
that's
sport
what
around
Colin
the world.
aspires
It
to
is
do
very
that.
popular.
And that's what we used as the backdrop to reinforce this notion that, okay, while the perception within the United States primarily is that boys field hockey is not either a thing at all or significantly less popular, we visited and met the Kirkpatrick family initially at Spooky Nook in Lancaster, where the Pan America Cup was taking place, which was the top 8 teams internationally within North and South America competing against each other in women's and men's field hockey.
I think Spooky Nook is the home of the USA women's team.
They are.
Those 4 criteria you talked about,
Sure.
are they the same if it's reversed? If
No.
it's a girl trying, okay.
No.
Just curious because I've watched girls wrestle.
Right.
And obviously they're taking a spot away from somebody else. I just was curious if
There-
it's
What
the
is
same.
the policy for that?
Well, the initial thing that, puts that all into place is Title IX. Title IX protections allow it so that if there is a sport that is not represented for girls to play, then the girl has to be allowed to participate on that boy's equivalent. The PIAA sponsors boys field hockey in the state of Pennsylvania. That policy changed, I believe it was in 2014, along with when these new criteria were rolled out. And so there's a lot of optics about this. If you were to look at that and say, okay, so why did they decide that they would sponsor boys field hockey at the same time? Well, first of all, a boys field hockey team would only be possible within a school if there are enough boys interested in playing that particular sport. And then even if they were to field a full team, who would they play against? But so long as that particular sport for boys is sponsored by the PIAA, Title IX protections don't apply for any boys that
Interesting.
have an interest in playing that sport.
I read some of the comments below, and a couple of them just kind of irritated me because they were like, there's more manly sport out there. And I'm like, really? That's not the point. That's not what the story is about.
There
It's not whether you
there
think
are
that
people who, whether they read or listened to the story or not, are basically saying, tough luck, kids should find another sport. I'm sure that's something the parents have heard.
And it's not just find another sport. I guess you could go play the club version of it.
Are there clubs around here?
Well, so that is the thing that Colin is fortunate to have, is that he is totally immersed in club teams in our area. He is able to play for different groups in Lancaster County. He's been involved in different aspects of the U.S. development teams for Team USA field hockey. He's at a kind of a weird point right now because he was invited to participate in the boys 15 and under development team for Team USA. It's basically the feeder program for the kids that one day end up playing
he's
on.
Good.
Oh, that's amazing.
He is very good. He is looked at as somebody who has the potential to one day play for Team USA in the Olympics. That dream that he has is possible. I mean, what happens between now and in the next 6 years when he would become 18 years old and be eligible to play on that team, who knows? But he definitely has the desire and he has the ability, and that goes back to the criteria. Mm-hmm. It's very possible that Palmyra also made this decision for competitive reasons. And if that is in fact the case, a lot of people would view that in a way, given that Palmyra is already as good as they are in field hockey, that you can't fault them for making that decision. But again, we were never...
What do you mean for competitive reasons? He would make the team less competitive?
No, he would create a significant competitive advantage.
Right, but if I'm Palmyra, why wouldn't I want to be better?
Because they're already one of the best. And they probably don't want to invite challenges, I would imagine, from other teams.
Well, again, you just have to look at it from the bylaw standpoint. The bylaw's language is if the boy would create a significant competitive advantage by joining that team, then the boy can't be allowed to play on the team.
And it sounds
it's a little odd, though. It's like the Supreme Court saying to the states, here's the laws. We're not going to come down with a decision. You interpret those any way you want to.
Way to bring politics.
Yeah. Well, it's just a little odd.
No, I think that is sort of where one comment that we received on our Facebook page when the story was published was somebody, he was being very critical and this is me quoting him. He called it piss poor journalism that the headline for the story didn't say PIAA rules prevent boy from playing field hockey, because he saw it as that the PIAA's rules are so vague that
or ambiguous
that it would result in any boy, if the school saw fit, by not being to not let them play on a team.
With those same rules, could an individual school district come to the conclusion that yes, in fact, he can play?
Yes, and that has happened too. Middletown, for example, one of the reasons why the superintendent for Palmyra has revisited these conversations with the Kirkpatrick parents is because the Palmyra middle school team played Middletown just a few days before our story aired. And when the two teams played each other, the Kirkpatrick family and the parents were there because Olivia is on the team, and they saw a boy on Middletown's team, and they went, "What?" Yeah. But you need to remember, every case is different. Every boy is different. Every school is different. Every team is different. And that's why the PIAA has tried its best, as they say, to set it up so that it is a case-by-case situation. And it's up to the schools to interpret their bylaws, because every situation is going to be different from all those aspects.
So if Colin is playing on, for devil's advocate's sake,
sure,
if Colin is playing on club teams, right, if he's already kind of on the path to being able to play for Team USA, why is it so important to his family that he play on the school team?
Well, why it's important to his parents is because they believe that it's important to raise awareness that field hockey is not just a sport for women. If you were to ask me from a reporting standpoint why I think it's important, is because the Kirkpatrick family and the Kirkpatrick parents are taxpayers in Palmyra School District. And they have been given the opportunity to let their kids be involved in athletics, which is one of our arms of education. And if the boy is not allowed to play on a team for the wrong reasons, then they could see it as, well, now I need to spend all this money on club teams. I need to spend all this money on traveling. If they were to end up enrolling their son in the developmental teams for Team USA, those teams play in California, they play in Massachusetts, they play all over the country, and that requires a lot of money to travel and send them out. And they just want to be able to have their son play in his own backyard.
What was the most challenging part of putting this story together? There are so many moving parts. The second you say gender and sports, everyone has an opinion and everyone becomes an expert. I'm sure that was hard to balance as you were figuring out how to present this in a fair way that would make people understand why they should pay attention.
I think the hardest part was I wanted to make sure people were aware that what we were reporting wasn't that knee-jerk, gut, visceral reaction that everybody seems to have when it comes to subjects like this. We wanted to avoid talking about the perceptions of boys and the perceptions of girls and how it relates when the two play sports against each other, and just focus on the policy. I'll leave it up to everybody at home to determine whether or not they think it's fair, or whether or not they think it's right, or whether or not they think it's moral or amoral. That's up to you. But this is the way it's set up right now. This is what the PIAA decided is the policies in place, and this is how schools go about determining whether or not boys can play alongside girls and vice versa.
And gender itself is such a hot topic, and as our society evolves, it sounds like the rules are probably going to have to change as well if they want to keep up.
Well, your favorite, the headline readers, saw a lot of people saw the headline, did not read the story, did not watch it, and assumed that Colin was transgender. And that was the issue. And that is not the issue here, but it is another gender and sports combination that I'm sure school districts need to navigate as well.
And the PIAA has language that seems to reference transgender students as it relates to athletics. And I just want to read from it so I make sure I get it right. Where a student's gender is questioned or uncertain, the decision of the principal as to the student's gender will be accepted by the PIAA. In lay terms,
so again, it's on the principal.
So the school gets to decide.
Yeah.
The school gets to decide. Specifically, the language the PIAA always uses is the principal. Of course, we know that this decision never comes down to just a principal. It's the principal, it's the athletic director, it's the superintendent, it's the school board, it's all of the different moving
Players.
parts.
And some people would argue it's principal IPLE and not principal PAL, but I don't know that I necessarily fault the PIAA. In other words, the individual school districts have principals and school boards, and there's local accountability there, as opposed to, because they would be zapped on the other side if they were just handing down these edicts and said, here's what you have to do,
Right.
and maybe forcing things on. Now, there's 500 different school districts across Pennsylvania.
And I'm glad that you actually bring that up, because in some of the deeper conversations that we had, that just it wasn't possible to get every piece of information that we gathered for this story on air. The story would have been the entire newscast.
That's why you're here now.
Exactly. Melissa Murch, she's the executive director for the PIAA. One of the conversations that we had was about some of the legal precedents that were set beyond Title IX that have navigated PIAA's bylaws to be where they are today. Sometime in the 70s, a few years after Title IX was established in 1972, the PIAA was sued. The subject was about mixed gender sports. What came from that lawsuit was that the PIAA cannot, in any certain terms, unilaterally say that boys can't play this sport, girls can't play this sport. And that's where the case-by-case nature of things started over 40 years ago. Then, in the late 2000s, and I wish I could remember exactly the year, but in the late 2000s, Wyoming Seminary was dominating field hockey in the state, winning multiple state championships, and they had several very talented boys on their varsity field hockey team. And from that, there were some concerned parents, namely a pair of parents who were lawyers. And from their concerns, in conjunction with the district attorney's office, maybe it was actually the attorney general's office, they reworked the bylaws to be what they are today.
Now, I have sat on the sidelines and not gotten myself in trouble thus far in the conversation.
Yeah, I know you're quiet over there.
Does that mean you're about to get yourself in trouble?
That's exactly
Dennis?
what it means, and I don't want it to come the wrong way, but I would understand frustration if you're an all-girls field hockey team and all of a sudden there's a team with 5 boys on it that are really athletic and more perhaps physical than the girls, and somebody might be saying, what's the deal here?
Right.
Why don't we just then create a boys' league, I guess. I would understand that frustration if that, in fact, were the situation.
You can see both sides.
Yeah.
But that's why I think the PIAA felt it was important to create some sort of filtering process.
Yeah, here's the criteria, but you need to be the one to filter through that.
Yeah, I think, I hate to get political in this in any way too, but so often people of millennial status, thought of as snowflakes because everyone's individual and everyone's unique and everybody's situation is different, but literally everyone's situation is different, and that's what this illustrates.
But so under the listing of sports, there's girls basketball and there's boys basketball, right? And there's girls swimming and boys swimming, and boys aren't on the girls swimming team. But field hockey, is that listed under a girls sport?
No,
at the various schools.
Technically, yes, but remember, the PIAA supports boys field hockey as a program if a school can field a team.
And thus far, to the best of our knowledge, 500 school districts, there isn't a single team in Pennsylvania.
No.
Why is there such a knee-jerk reaction when this topic comes up? Is it the mixture of gender and sports? Is it the parents kind of saying, I want to protect my child's right to play or right to be competitive, whether you're a parent who's against a boy playing on the team because you maybe have a daughter on the team, or whether you're Colin's parents who say, hey, my kid has a right to play too. There's just this immediate strong reaction to this story that makes it hard to kind of get through the facts sometimes.
I think, depending on which side of the fence you sit on in terms of your opinion, I think for parents who are advocates of giving their children and students within the schools opportunities to play sports and be involved in whatever it is that they want to be involved in, I think for them this is a microcosm of the problem that we have in our country when it comes to gender equality and gender equity. For people on the other side who think that it's a sham that everyone gets to do whatever they want and that boys get to play alongside girls just because it's a sport that they want to play, and that their parents aren't satisfied with being told, no, your son or your daughter can't do this. It's about this everybody gets a medal mentality that a lot of our sports leagues have kind of devolved to, in their opinion, in this country.
Or why don't we just throw it open, make it co-ed right off the jump street, and maybe every school, if they encourage, hey, if any boys want to come out and play, come on out and play, and then maybe it's boys and girls, and there we go.
And there are life lessons to be learned in situations where you're flat out just told, no, you can't do this. Whether or not that life lesson is, I don't think that life lesson is just to accept it, but there's a lesson to be learned that there are certain situations where you're not always going to get what you want. Because again, there's this sort of cultural arm that is extended from these conversations, this instant gratification society that we've kind of fallen into. You don't always get what you want, and if you time and time again keep fighting to get what you want, sometimes it doesn't allow that lesson to sink in.
So when you were 5 years old and you said to your mom, that's not fair, Mom said,
life's not fair.
Life's not fair.
But sometimes people do use that argument as a way to dismiss someone's concerns, and I don't think we should necessarily go down that role either, because you could say there's a lesson to be learned in that you can't always get what you want to the parents who might be concerned that their daughters don't get the same competitive opportunities if there are boys on the team, because sometimes there are going to be players that are just better than you.
Well, it sounds like they went through the process that's there. They evaluated the 4 questions, and that's what they came up with. I mean, I think the good thing in this scenario is that he still gets to play the sport he loves. He's doing it in another way.
Well, and let me ask. But is there
But that's
possibility?
optional. They don't have to pay for it if they don't want to.
Is it possibility that there's lawsuits?
I don't think so. I don't think the parent. Superintendent Brown met with the Kirkpatrick parents the day after our story aired to further talk about whether or not Colin would be allowed to play. That conversation, as far as I am aware, has not reached a conclusion in terms of a decision. The Kirkpatrick parents told me that they would let me know, whether or not a decision is made. But they met. And from what I was told, the conversation was good, but it was left hanging in terms of whether or not Colin would get to play.
And has anyone from the school district gotten back to you just explaining the general policy? I know they can't always talk about individual students.
Yeah, there's FMLA and other things that would prevent them from talking about specific students, but no one at the school has corresponded with me since.
Which, for the record, that's a bad idea. School districts out there, if you're going to do something like this, you're going to have a policy. Stand up and tell us why. You probably have you may have very good reasons that half the people are going to agree with you right off Jump Street.
You don't have to talk about the individual student.
Just tell us what your concerns are.
And just so that I had as much background information as possible, because we knew that once the story ran that everyone was going to have an opinion and that most of those opinions were going to be strong. When I was informed about this whole Middletown field hockey situation with the middle school team having a boy on their team, I called the athletic director at Middletown. We had a good conversation. He was very transparent. He basically said, yeah, we found out that this boy wanted to play. We went and we looked at the 4 criteria. We sat down and talked about it, and we didn't see there being an issue. That's Middletown's prerogative. That Middletown situation, though, could also be different in terms of where their field hockey program is, what this boy's ability would do in terms of the overall ability of the team.
Reevaluated in a few years.
Certainly, yeah.
Interesting.
I think we're going to see more and more of this.
And I think there's a window for parents who have concerns about these things now to come out and express their displeasure with these situations. I think the Kirkpatrick parents are very proud of the fact that they are trying to spread awareness about field hockey as it relates to boys playing. I don't know what other sports this situation may come up with. I'm sure there will be more in the future, like Kendra said. And I think people are just more comfortable with saying if they're upset about their kid not getting to do something as it relates to schools and education, which for me is ultimately, we can talk about all the championships in the world that these teams play for, but athletics is ultimately an arm of our educational system.
And our tax dollars fund it. So whatever your opinion is, I think this is something you should care about because it's something you're paying for, whatever side of this argument you fall on. Last year, at the time, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick made headlines when the press noticed he was sitting during the national anthem. He said he was protesting police brutality and was doing so during the national anthem because he believes not everyone is getting justice and freedom under this flag. After meeting with a veteran who published an open letter in response to the protest, Kaepernick decided to start kneeling during the national anthem instead. As months went on, that protest got less and less attention until Donald Trump, during a rally in Alabama, brought up the protest and called players who kneel, quote, sons of bitches. That re-energized the protest, with more players kneeling, many standing and locking arms. The Pittsburgh Steelers at one point having the entire team stay in the locker room during the national anthem. And it's ignited this national conversation. And Ross, we're keeping you on here for this part of the conversation because it is that intersection of sports, politics, what it means to be patriotic. So from the sports reporter's standpoint, what are you seeing here? Is there anything people are overlooking with this conversation?
I think it comes down to two things. One, I think the fact that it is so uncomfortable for people to have this conversation with people who disagree with their position might be the greatest indictment about where we are culturally as a country today.
And you're talking about the subject of race, not the subject of the flag.
Both. Because for people who understand the intention the players have in having these protests, because it's like we as journalists, and I like to use the word journalists rather than media because I think the term media is being evoked in a way to try to bunch us up with
what does that word even mean anymore?
It's almost like media is being tied into these cacophonous talking heads who just have these instant knee-jerk reactions to everything, and there's not actual reporting happening. So as journalists to hear to hear people talk about whether or not this is a protest about the national anthem or a protest about what they feel is is happening in terms of social inequity in this country and race inequity in this country. We've buttoned it up into, national anthem protests, but they're not national anthem protests from the players' perspective.
Right. They're protests during the national anthem from their perspective.
But I understand why, nonetheless, people get very offended and very upset that they are choosing this particular time to try to protest something that they feel is wrong in this country and, frankly, is wrong in this country. But they've, the people who say that it's wrong for them to be kneeling during the national anthem, they're saying, choose a different time, choose a different setting.
But they want to do it then because that's the best platform for them. They've got millions of people watching. I mean, if they do it in their home or they're doing it, nobody's going to notice it. I mean, they're picking that for a reason.
Well, and every protest, every protest that you disagree with, I think there's always going to be an argument of different time, different place, different way, no matter what. But to me, what's really interesting is this is another one where it's hard to even just have a conversation with two reasonable people who might disagree on this topic. It devolves into a shouting match and a competition over who's more patriotic, and that loses the entire message and the conversation that I think was intended with the start of all this.
So what do we do instead? We go to our phones, we scroll Twitter, we look at all of the tweets of the people that we follow because we tend to follow people who agree with our point of views more times than not. And we get caught in these echo chambers of conversations with people who are like-minded than us. But God forbid you try and talk to somebody who has a differing point of view about this. It literally makes people's stomachs churn just to try to even force that conversation. I'll give an example. I don't want to sit here, up on a mountain and seem holier than thou when it comes to this. I am guilty of this too.
I think we all are.
I was at just last week. Penn State every Tuesday has a weekly media press conference with James Franklin for the football team. I felt it was important to ask a question about these protests during the national anthem. Again, I don't want to say national anthem protests because those are two different things. These protests during the national anthem and how James Franklin, the players on the team, are navigating this issue, because anything that happens in the NFL is ultimately going to spill into college football, specifically because there are a lot of players on those teams who one day hope to be in the NFL. And if the president of the United States is calling NFL players sons of bitches, by proxy, they are calling anyone who has a dream of one day playing in the NFL sons of bitches. So there's that aspect of it. Two people ultimately during this press conference asked James a question about these protests during the national anthem. Bob Flounders of Penn Live, who's probably the local scribe who has been on the Penn State Beat the most, and me. And when both of us asked those questions, at least from what I heard Bob sound on the phone, because he calls through the phone and I'm physically there, we both sounded a little trepidatious and uncomfortable in asking the question. I certainly know that I did. I could feel my face getting flush. I could feel this level of anxiety that I normally don't have heading into a question with James about this issue. I wanted to ask him about a specific player on the team, Lamont Wade. He was posting a lot of videos on social media and doing like Facebook Lives and Periscopes and things like that, where he was talking about how he as a black man feels about this and why is it so hard for us to have these conversations. I think one of the videos was, why do we hate each other just because we disagree on things? Mm-hmm. And it was so uncomfortable for me just to even get the question out. And
why? Because you thought he'd get angry, or
that's the thing. I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know why it was. It just because I know how tenuous and how much visceralness there is around the issue. And if I, as a reporter, can't even, feel comfortable asking these questions and having this conversation, that is a hard road for us all to get through. Well, forget about whether or not we're journalists, but just as Americans.
And as journalists and as reporters, you start down that topic, and if you say something perceived the wrong way, and it's viral and it's everywhere around the world, and you're losing your job if it's just easier not to go there as a reporter.
For people who want to they want to protect their jobs. I mean, they want to protect their own interests. They want to protect being slammed by whoever on social media and all this sort of stuff. It has become so hard for us to look into one another's eyes and just say, hey, why do you feel the way you do? Let me take my own opinion out of this. Whatever it is that I might feel, let me just listen to what you have to say and just really absorb that. We don't listen anymore. That's the other thing. We really don't listen. We're so quick to just jump on, okay, I'm hearing the first 5 words of what you have to say, and I already know my counterpoint, and it's going to be so good for my opinion and my perspective, and I'm going to win. Who cares if you win? Like, let's just have a good dialogue. Let's just get beyond these huge barriers that have been created, and trust me, there's a lot of the media does have a huge role in why these divisions exist where they are today. And the president is equally culpable as it comes to why these divisions are where they are today. But we need to move beyond those. We need to move beyond all of those circumstances. And I think if players playing a game is a catalyst for such discomfort in what it is that they choose to do before that game, we need to move past that.
I think part of it is, and this is not my personal opinion, I'm just saying I think people tune into football because it's fun, it's how they relax, and now it's somewhat becoming political. And I think that's part of the issue.
It became political.
It became political. I made a conscious choice to quote unquote stay in my own lane when it came to anything having to do with the president, because there had never been a reason for sports to get brought into the conversation. But the moment the president referred to players in the NFL the way he did, those lanes, so to speak, go away.
Well, it got political even before that, though, because I think what a lot of people forget is players used to not be out on the sidelines during the national anthem. That practice started in 2009 when the Department of Defense started paying the NFL for displays of patriotism as part of a military recruitment effort. And it is a line item in the budget of the United States of America that the Department of Defense pays the NFL for this for military recruitment. So in that sense, politics has been part of sports. And I guess I don't know why people are confused that players who did not play a part in that decision to receive money from the Department of Defense would at some point say, well, wait a minute, why do we have to participate in this when there is this injustice that we believe is happening? I find it interesting that a lot of people who say, I just want to watch the game, are others who complain about, quote, safe spaces on college campuses, because what you're basically asking for is for the game to be your safe space where you don't have to encounter opinions different from what you have.
I'm looking across the table and I can see Dennis's face right now.
Dennis has been very quiet.
I do. I want to.
Where I'm confused. So first of all, and we're taping this on the day of a horrific shooting in Las Vegas, where clearly something went wrong. Okay, there's an ultimate fail there, and you see that's obviously the negative of a disgruntled person. And so if a football player wants to try to draw attention to what they perceive to be problems in America, I think it is quite peaceful the way the NFL has chosen to do it, and me personally has made me think about what societally is happening that they're so upset about. I don't automatically see that. I don't know where are the people that make the leap that if I'm doing a peaceful protest, I'm disrespecting the military. I don't know where that came in.
Well, because
and
our
that's
flag
just one
is now
person's
associated with the military.
And why is that? I mean, why is it automatically associated with the military? Now, trust me, my dad was in World War II. I lost an uncle in World War II to the Nazis. My brother was in Vietnam. I love the military. So let's be clear about that. But the fact of the matter is, first of all, the military reports to a civilian for a reason, the president and commander-in-chief, that they don't control the country. But number two, That, the right to protest was one of the founding fathers' first things they put in, because the place where they came from, if you protested the government, you get your head cut off. So they wanted to make sure people had the right to protest. And if this is as big a protest as there is, and that is they're just trying to draw your attention in a very peaceful way, I frankly don't understand all the uproar. Now, let me just say, 5 different people that I said what I just said to that are of my age group and my generation completely disagree with me. You said it well, that many people believe that's the wrong time and wrong place, and maybe they should designate one player on each team, and in the post-game press conference, they all make the point of social inequities in America. Everybody in a post-game press conference is making the same point on the same teams on the same day. Maybe that would be as effective.
I don't think it's not visually and not. They can cut that out if you're playing the anthem and you're showing what's happening. I think. Like I said, they're picking
not
that reason
to be convenient.
Yeah, they're picking that moment for a reason.
Right.
And I think the other thing, and actually our producer Sam and I were talking about this, how people are saying it's disrespecting the flag, and we were talking about how all of us have probably disrespected the flag and the rules. Like, you're not supposed to print the flag on clothes. You're not supposed to have a beach towel with the flag on it. But people do that all the time. And according to the rules of our flag, you are disrespecting the flag when you do that. And all of us have done it. I've worn a shirt
I did a story with State Senator Mike Regan last week about he wants a resolution rebuking them for disrespecting the flag, and he was wearing flag socks.
Right.
And somebody sent letters saying we should be calling him out on that.
So, that's actually in the rules of that is disrespecting.
But
the
I
flag
have a
code.
nice flag T-shirt.
I know, but you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to.
I think this comes back to just sort of breaking down the difference between the written rules in our society and the intention that people have in making the decisions that they do. There can be a whole litany of flag codes that exist as they do. Another one, just to point out the hypocrisy, that if we base our actions off of the word of the flag code, the flag is not supposed to be laid horizontally, yet we make 9,000 feet long flags and lay them across NFL stadiums before to do these big displays of patriotism. That's a violation of the flag code. Our intention in doing that, though, is to honor the country in the biggest and most patriotic way that we come to understand it based on the mediums that exist in our country. The reason why it makes such a big statement to have such a big flag is because we are a visual country. And to have such a big display on television shows, in our own way, our intention of showing that we are united. The players' intention, and they have said this time and time again, their intention is to not offend the military, is to not disgrace our flag nor its anthem, but to make a statement about racial inequity in this country. That's their intention. And if we start conflating the way rules are written with the intention behind actions, we are going to go further and further down this road of disagreement.
And I think it's one of those things where, as the conversation can devolve, as you're talking to people about the different rules or regulations and the intentions, what I hear a lot, and I've been talking to friends I have who've served, a lot of people will say, well, you didn't serve, so you're not in the military, so you don't understand. Well, by that logic, if you're not black, you probably don't fully understand the reason of this protest. I think we can have a conversation where we all acknowledge there are certain aspects we're just not going to get. But my friends who serve and who have served overwhelmingly have said, it doesn't bother me when people don't stand, because I see myself as fighting for people's right to peacefully protest and right to do that or not do that. But it does bother me when I feel like I'm being used as a prop for someone. And that's how some, not all, of my friends who serve and who have served feel they are being used in this debate and in a way where they really don't want to be.
I know you want to say something, but real quick, I think a great example of somebody who has been used as a prop is Alejandro Villanueva of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The way in which he was depicted during that pregame ceremony. He's
the one who went and stood when the team was in the locker room.
He served in the military. He's an offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers, as a team, decided to not go out on the field for the national anthem in the days following President Trump's comments. He wanted to be able to see the flag. They were away in Chicago, Soldier Field, unfamiliar territory, unfamiliar tunnels. How do you get to the field? Where's the flag going to be set up? All that sort of stuff. He makes his way out onto the field. He is standing so that he can be within a line of sight of the flag. All he wanted to do was be able to see the flag. But when the national broadcast by CBS goes up, showing the national anthem in an empty sideline for the Steelers except for the coaching staff, they find Villanueva just outside of the tunnel where all of his players are behind him. And what do? They get as close and tight on him as possible to the point where they are literally blocking out the players that are behind him right inside of the tunnel with their hands over their hearts. And suddenly, the optics of the situation is he's a proud patriot. He's a proud member of our military.
And everyone else hates the United States.
And he, after the game, goes out and says, this is a huge misunderstanding. I feel so bad. I feel like I made the wrong decision because now everybody is attacking my teammates and my team for making a decision. And I feel like I did the wrong thing for wanting to be able to see my flag. And it's like the way we present images and the way we present information has such a huge role in the way that everybody ends up perceiving these situations. And that's a responsibility on us.
And I think, wasn't that part of it also that the team decided to stay in, that they made a group decision, right? And that he kind of went. The reason some people were frustrated with him wasn't because he went to see the flag. It was because we made a decision we're going to do this as a team, and he kind of didn't.
And staying in the locker room wasn't in and of itself meant to be a protest. It was, from what it sounds like, a coaching decision of, hey, mine's focused on the game, not on who's standing, who's sitting, who's kneeling, and we're going to just avoid being part of all that. But of course, by doing that, they became part of all that.
There's a big difference between what the Steelers decided to do, which was avoid the national anthem to stay focused on the game and put themselves out of the situation, and what the Seattle Seahawks did, which is not participate in the national anthem in order to make a statement about the protests that have been happening. Big difference between those two things. And again, that's intention.
We overanalyze every little movement that somebody makes, and that's the part that annoys me. If they want to protest, fine. We have that right. In other countries, you cannot do that. Right. I think what I get so annoyed with is all this little, what did they do and where did they look? And they were standing like this, but
and
he was looking that way.
And now I'm going to burn my jersey.
And it's like, oh my gosh. And then they'll have the other opposite reaction where, now I'm going to burn the jersey. I'm like, slow down here for a second.
Well, and then you have the president and a number of the people like that I'm talking to that are my generation, the older generation. Those players are employees of someone, and we talk about freedom of speech and having it. Well,
we can get fired if we say certain things.
We could get fired for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, right?
Yes.
So everybody's got a boss, kind of. And so some people think those bosses ought to be inflicting a little more, here's laying down the rules for the employee.
Well, and that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence of that speech.
Right.
So freedom of speech means your government is not going to jail you for what you say unless it falls under categories of unprotected speech, like yelling fire in a crowded theater. So these players know that when they exercise their right to freedom of speech, there could be consequences if the NFL chooses to crack down. They are opening themselves up to backlash from other people. I would imagine they went into that with eyes wide open, and they continue to do that. So you also, if you disagree with their protest, you have the right to use your freedom of speech to say, I think this is dumb. That's the way it works. But when I start hearing things about how it should be illegal to not stand for the national anthem, and that's what other countries do, well, the other countries that do that are dictatorships, and I don't think we want to go down that route because that is the exact opposite of what our flag stands for.
But it will be interesting to see, because I'm pretty sure one thing the NFL really recognizes, despite the red, white, and blue, is the green. How much money are they making? And they notice dip in revenues, and they notice dips in viewership. And I've talked to a couple of people who have taken DirecTV up on their offer of, I'm going to cancel the rest of the season and get my money back type of thing. And it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is.
And it will be interesting to see how long that lasts. Because, again, we've talked about knee-jerk reactions a lot on this particular episode. When feelings are hot about that, I wonder how that will balance against the desire to watch the game.
I have vowed to continue watching until the Eagles win the Super Bowl, so I'm in for the long haul.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Now it's time for a word from you, your comments and questions that you sent us in during the week. Kendra, I have to admit, was so surprised at how quickly our episode about thyroid problems spread. It is our most shared episode. Our comments on that have been overwhelming. I did not realize how many people suffer through those problems, and it sounds like a lot of people related to what you were saying on that episode.
Yeah, it was nice for me too, because I was a little relieved, because then viewers started reaching out and be like, I have the same. So you have that. Me too. I go through that too. So that was nice. And I was glad that we were able to just get the message out there, because I think there are people out there suffering that don't realize it. So knowing that it reached a lot of people and having the feedback was very nice. And I think that was the reason we did it, was just to kind of raise awareness about it.
We got an email from Deb that I want to read. She sent us in an email after the episode saying, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer on October 2013. I truly believe there's a good possibility that TMI, as in 3 Mile Island, had something to do with my cancer. I do not have a family history of cancer of any kind, so being told I had thyroid cancer was a shock. My entire thyroid was removed, and I went through radioactive iodine treatment. I now need to be on thyroid replacement medication for life and be checked yearly to make sure the cancer does not return. And I was talking to a friend who has a family member who is on thyroid replacement medication. If you don't take that, you die. And it is very expensive. So that is a whole nother layer of this conversation that we were having that I think a lot of people just don't realize. If you'd like to check out the links to the stories, articles, and videos we discussed, you can find them in our show notes on our website, abc27.com. To get On Deadline delivered directly to your phone, tablet, or computer each week, subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Record your thoughts, questions, and suggestions about episodes in voice memos on your phone and email them to us at theinvestigators, investigators, at abc27.com. Please take a few minutes and leave us a review in iTunes. It helps our podcast reach other people, and it helps us figure out what we can improve. Thank you, Eric Semmel, for producing this podcast, Jason Dietz for composing and recording the music, and Ross Lippman for being a guest on today's episode. We loved having you. Hopefully you come back. We didn't scar you too much. It's time for us to go. We're on deadline.